Hello, and welcome to the Brighter Thinking Pod from Cambridge University Press. My name is Adam, and I'm one of the producers on the pod. Before we get started with today's topic, I want you to imagine the time you'd save if you had classroom assessments that mark themselves. Assessments that adapt to every student's abilities and aptitudes. I'm talking about testing that's suitable for all ages with the power to reveal individual strengths and struggles. This technology frees you to teach, gives you more insight than ever before, and allows you to set motivational goals for each of your students. Sound good? Okay, stop imagining. What I've just described are baseline assessments from the Centre for Evaluation and Monitoring. If you're interested in learning more, go to cem.org. That's CEM.org. Okay, let's get on with the pod.
Hello and welcome to the Brighter Thinking Pod from Cambridge University Press, the podcast that brings you advice and conversation from authors, teachers and academics with a slice of entertainment on the side too. I'm hosting today's episode. My name is Victoria Renfro and I am the Head of Professional Development for Cambridge Link for Schools here at the Press. Today we're going to be taking a closer look at teaching remotely, and I'm joined by two guests who have an awful lot of experience in this area. Let's meet our guests. Siti Zaleha is a secondary mathematics teacher and teacher trainer in Malaysia. Siti is a professional development mentor here at the Press and was selected as one of the 5 EdmodoCon 2021 Global High Five presenters. Welcome, Siti.
Hello.
Hello. Really glad that you can be with us. We're also joined by Nik Peachey. Nik is the Director of Pedagogy at Peachey Publications, which was shortlisted for an Innovations Award in 2021 for its Teachers Classroom app. Nik has just finished working on an ICT training course for teachers in Nepal and a MOOC about remote teaching for the British Council in Argentina. Welcome, Nik.
Thank you for inviting me.
So remember that all the links and info that we're going to discuss in this podcast today are in the show notes. And if you want to get your voice heard on a future show, you can get in touch on Twitter at CUP Education and by using the hashtag BrighterPod. And of course, please remember to like, review and subscribe to the podcast on whatever platform you are listening on today. Okay, before we dive into today's topic, we have a little icebreaker so that listeners can get to know more about you. And what I'd like to know is, who was your favourite teacher when you were in school and why? Nik, can we hear from you first?
Yeah, sure. That's an interesting question for me because I wasn't particularly a school-friendly person and I didn't do particularly well at school, which is quite surprising for somebody who's involved in education. I was a bit of an academic failure and dropped out of school and did various kind of dead-end jobs and things like that before I actually returned to school and did a university degree which I started when I was 24. And actually, my favourite teacher was the person who helped me do that, really. And he was my guitar teacher. I did a degree in music. And I think he was very influential for me because he taught me, more than anything, he taught me how to learn for myself. And how to be an autonomous learner. And I mean, I think that's, one of the greatest gifts that I received from any teacher and something that's continued to sort of, support me, after my master's and every day from then on. And the other thing that I think was quite important about him was that, he believed in me and, that made an awful lot of difference. I hadn't got on particularly well at school and, wasn't allowed to do O-levels, not even in English because I wasn't intelligent enough for that. And, and to sit down with the teacher who believed in you, was, this remarkable thing, he had this remarkable faith in me. And that really, I'll be eternally grateful for,
That's an absolutely amazing story, Nik. I'm not sure where we go from here. We've had a high in the first 5 minutes. What a wonderful story about your trajectory through education and the power of one teacher.
Yeah,
And
I
that
think
that teacher can be from any discipline, and it's how you make the student feel about themselves and their potential.
yeah, I mean, he had this huge influence on my life, which, otherwise, I'd probably still be, I don't know, doing building work and digging ditches and cleaning floors and things like that, which was what I was doing before then. And,
Yeah,
it's amazing.
yeah. What a wonderful story. I feel a bit teary, Nick. Just that is really wonderful. And do you think that's really interesting that you've become, your life now is all about education. Do you think that is because of your experience and wanting to make it a different experience for other young people?
I don't know. I think partly it's because of that, partly, one of the things that I think is wrong with education in many ways is that, education is controlled and developed by the people for whom it was successful,
Mm-hmm.
and so, having been through the system and experienced it being unsuccessful, you have a very different insight into it. And I think for me, that's something that, I have tried to carry into my work and something that I think is very valuable, and I'm constantly reminded of that. As a language teacher, I'm actually not a very good language learner. And I think that makes me very
Yes,
sympathetic as a teacher as well.
absolutely.
There's, I mean, it's a cliche in a way, but there's an awful lot to be learned from failure. And, I hope that I've, learned a lot from my experiences and from my struggles in that way.
Absolutely. And you're right. We do need a range of voices in the education world and a range of voices from a range of learners. So I can absolutely see why your voice and your publications are so necessary and popular. Thank you. Thank you so much for that. Siti, question to you now. So your favorite teacher and why?
Oh, okay. Before I start spilling all my stories about my favorite teacher, I just want to say that, Nick, I'm in the same team as yours. I don't recall many nice, sweet, brighter memories when I was at secondary school, because I think that was the turning point that I started to realize that I'm not that smart, actually. Yeah. So the environment made me. Okay, so my favorite teacher is Miss Haliza. She was my additional mathematics teacher as well as my engineering drawing teacher back at school when I was in Form 5 or Year 11 equivalent. I was doing fairly okay in normal maths, but when it comes to additional mathematics, it's like the alter ego of my left brain hemisphere decided to just come out. So I failed any given test from the year before until my mock exam the next year. One thing that super striking about Miss Haliza is she's always patient with me. She understands that being a teenager is hard enough. And she knew I sometimes went to the bathroom just to cry because it was so overwhelming being in a classroom when everybody gets whatever is being taught. And I was like clueless, try to decipher all the codes. Like, what is my teacher talking about? Yeah, things like that. So I passed my first test a year later, and she baked me a chocolate cake. So,
Oh, oh, how lovely.
so I guess that's a turning point for me, because after I finish my secondary school, I still take maths for my matriculation all the way to uni, and that's because of her. So yeah.
That's a wonderful story again. And I think what unites both of your stories there is that teacher that believed in you and that encouraged you to succeed and saw something in you that you didn't see in yourself and really opened your
Absolutely.
eyes to that part of you.
Yes.
That part of you, Siti, that's gone on to be an incredibly successful maths teacher. So yeah, and also another interesting link between the two stories we heard there is that idea that you yourselves didn't feel like you were a very strong student in your subject areas, that now your primary teaching areas, and that you maybe have that affinity with students who struggle in that subject area. Very interesting indeed. Right then, I think we will move on to our topic today. So looking at remote learning. And we hear a lot of the bad press, don't we, about remote learning? But I would like to ask each of you, what's your favourite thing about teaching online? And maybe Siti, we can start with you this time. So, what is your favourite thing about teaching online?
This is unpopular opinion, but it's my opinion. Okay, so my favorite thing about teaching online.
No opinions are wrong. Yeah.
Okay, I appreciate that. Okay, my favorite thing about teaching online is that it allows me to enter a whole new world of unspoken thoughts and silences being made visible, and I am allowed to interact with it. Okay, allow me to explain. Okay, so in physical classroom, you can't really interact with many students at once. And it's always the keen and the eager ones that will volunteer most of the time. And you always, as a teacher, have to make conscious effort to engage the reserved ones, the quiet ones, and the ones who struggle with the subjects. But now, all these are just mere illusions after I started teaching online. I would say it's the power of texting via class group chat and individual texting through Google Hangouts. And this is especially true because I've read an article a couple of months back from The Guardian titled, It's the End of Phone Calls, Why Youngsters Silence Their Phones. So teenagers these days are super keen to interact more openly via text rather than using their voice. So whenever my online lesson started, the chat section comes alive with the students trying to say hi to me. One told me they haven't had their breakfast. One shared a photo of their cats and so on. So it's a skill that I've come to master is I need to type and respond ASAP, just like how pro they are, right? But it opens up a new way of communication for me to understand my students better. So the quiet ones are the ones that turned 360 degrees and contributed a lot as the session went. Surprise, surprise. So I value relationships and inclusion as two of the core elements in my teaching and learning, and how glad I feel when I have been enabled to explore the depth of my students, knowing them personally, individually with this discovery, pretty much. Yeah.
Right. So would you say then that it's an equalizer?
Indeed, it is. Yes.
Yeah. I think I would agree. Okay, so over to you now, Nik. What is your favourite thing about teaching online?
I'd just like to follow up a bit on what Siti said, and it's a wonderful thing to hear, a teacher saying that, that teaching remotely has improved their relationship with students because, so many have said the opposite, and that, they don't feel connected to the class, to the students, and it's a big criticism of remote learning. And I feel that, Siti's experience is very valid, and that's been my experience too, is that you can still make that human connection, and that's very important. Well, in terms of one of my favourite aspects of teaching remotely actually comes down to sort of the kind of work that I do mostly, which is technology training for teachers, and I've spent years going around classrooms and language labs, trying to get teachers to log into computers and do training on computers that they're not used to and things like that. And it's always very stressful and a nightmare. And now doing it remotely, it's so much easier because, I'm here on my computer, my trainees are there, they've got their own computer, they're logged in, they've got their own connection, they know how to use it, they know how to access their email through it. And you can just do so much more, there are lots of different apps and different websites that you can point them towards and get them using and collaborating on them. It's just sort of made my work so much easier, really, I guess, than it was in the physical classroom. But that's mainly because a lot of the work I do is with technology and training teachers how to use technology. For me, that's made life much easier, and that's something that I really like about it.
Yeah. So you were maybe ahead of the curve, really. When everybody started teaching remotely in 2020, you had prior experience of that.
Yeah, I taught my first I did my first online lesson back in 1998, so I'm a bit of a
wow.
back in the last
we're talking
century.
to the right person.
And But
That's
I
impressive.
was working as head of learning for an online school back in 2014. So we were teaching students in Brazil remotely, lots of one-to-one classes and group classes. And as head of learning, I had to go around and, observe. Well, I had to watch my teachers' lessons. And so they were all video recorded, and I was able to go and watch them afterwards, which was another great advantages of remote learning, because, one of the big worries that a lot of teacher trainers and directors of studies brought up with remote learning was, well, how do you know what's going on in your classroom? How do you evaluate that? And for me, I thought, well, actually, that's easier. I've got recordings of every single lesson, The big
Of
problem then,
course,
though,
yeah.
was, of course, that we had 2,000 hours of lessons each month. So how do I get through that and look at all of that? So but we worked out a way of selectively going and sort of watching different parts of each teacher's lesson, and that was really useful, and really useful for the teacher too, because you could point them back to, hey, your lesson on the 20th of June at 3:00, go and look at this bit, think about what you did there, and that can be very useful for teacher development. That's very difficult to do in the physical classroom.
That's a really good point, Nick, because one of the things that we often talk about in teacher training is the value of having someone record you.
Mm-hmm.
Before most of the teachers in the world had done any remote teaching, the idea that if someone can record you teaching and if you can watch yourself back, that's incredibly valuable. But of course, it was an experience that not many teachers had, and but now, yes, you're right. There are recordings of everyone teaching. You can go back and review your teaching. Siti, have you done that? Have you gone back and watched a prior lesson to learn something about your teaching?
I had a few recordings when I first started online teaching. And the first thing, I think this is what Adam said before as well. Oh my God, that's how I sounded.
Yes. Yeah.
But beyond that, yes, because sometimes you plan one thing, but when you act on it, it went differently because you started implement things according to the dynamics of the class, how the students are responding to you. And sometimes you realize, oh, I just went 90 degrees to the other side from what I planned out on that day. And just to sit down back and ask myself, why did I do it this way? What justifies it? That is a good reflective tool, I find.
Yeah. I think, thank you, Nick, for making that point, because I think it is an incredibly valuable resources that teachers now have ample recordings of themselves to go back and reflect on and see their learning and development. Because I'm sure, Siti, as you're quite new compared to Nick to teaching remotely, if you watched a video from March 2020 and then you watched a video from last week, what differences do you think you'd see there?
I think one thing is I'll be more chill compared to how I was before.
Right. Yes, I can see that. Yeah.
Because no one is truly prepared to deal with the pandemic and deal with online teaching in the first place. I mean, Nick is the exclusion we have here.
Yes.
We have to constantly evolve, change, and implement many things at once. And I was so into this idea that in the beginning, like, you have to ask students to switch on their cam. You need to see them straight in front of the camera, and that equals to them paying attention. But along the way, that perception has changed greatly. And then I think I'll share a little bit more later as to why. Yep.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. No, I think that has been a huge shift, hasn't it? Well, to get back on track a little bit there then. Nick, just following on from what you were saying there about you've got this great experience, this very long experience of teaching remotely. A lot of teachers that we work with, they want to know how to make their online lessons feel more like a classroom environment. I get the feeling you might be about to tell me that you can't and you need to approach this differently. It'd be interesting to see what you've got to say. But to those teachers who do say, how do I get the things that I'm missing from a classroom environment? How do I get the best of a classroom environment in my remote teaching? What would you say?
I think, one of the main things that a lot of teachers forget when they move to remote learning is one of the reasons why students enjoy coming to class. And one of the reasons they enjoy coming to class isn't to learn stuff, I'm afraid. It's to see each other and spend some time with their
Yeah,
friends and things like
of
that.
course.
And I think this is a really important aspect of any online class, is that you make some time for socialization. Sometime when they can just sit together and have a chat, whether you have 5 minutes in the middle where you put them into breakout rooms and they're unobserved and can chat with each other, or whether you organize games or structured games so that they can play together, or whether your school even has a kind of remote social activities program. Having something like that, to where students can just relax together and chat and be friends together without the pressure of having to be taught. I think that's very important. And I think that, particularly during the pandemic, when students were in lockdown and weren't able to leave their homes and see their friends, that's something that's so important. And it's one of the great, the weaknesses, I guess, of online learning or remote learning, is that you can start to feel very isolated. Often one of the things that you pick up from being in a physical class is you kind of judge how well you're doing by how well other people are doing. If you're struggling and everybody else is struggling, you kind of feel, oh well, it's a difficult lesson. But when you're on your own and you're struggling, then that's that much more difficult to deal with, because you think it's just you. So having that element of socialization, I think, is one of the things that can really help classes go that much better.
Yeah, I think when you were talking about that solidarity, I think even it might just even be a glance, mightn't it, from the student next to you, just a glance that says, "Oh, I'm finding this really hard too," and that might just give you that feedback that you need to carry on. And without that, the sense of isolation is huge, isn't it? Siti, what would you say? How do you bring the best of those face-to-face classrooms into your remote teaching?
I think one realization I have about doing things remotely is it doesn't have to be done on the spot. We always have options to teach and assign tasks offline and as well online. And I think if I reflect back to when we had the Cambridge Schools Conference online back in April, I had the opportunity to learn from Dr. Rhonda, and her session about student engagement really outlined that we have effective behavioral and cognitive engagement. So when it comes to making the classroom more alive, doesn't mean that we really need to ask the students to always behave in like one way and meet our expectations, because then they will feel forced. And like Nik said, like they were isolated. The last thing they want is to be told not to interact with their classmates. And that's kind of sad, really. But to add to that, I think one thing that nobody can replace or replicate from you as a teacher is who you really are. Your personality and what you advocate will always shine through, no matter what class you teach, online or physical. I always have set a routine. I sounded like a broken record when in physical classroom, because I just want them to have their maths class mode started. So I always say, like, books on the table, devices screen down, bottles on the floor, because there's always flood on the table because they love their water bottles so much. you know. Uh, so setting up a simple routine really sets the tone at the beginning of the class. And this can be done simultaneously or in parallel when you just have your online lesson. So I tell the students, okay, please mute yourself and on it your mic when you need to speak, text me when you need help, and let's support each other and contribute together. So yeah.
That's great advice. So those routines that you had in the classroom that made everything go smoothly are every bit as valuable when you move to remote learning. Yeah, that's some wonderful advice for teachers. Thank you so much. So we've talked about individual lessons very much now, but thinking now about a series of lessons, maybe a project that goes on for many weeks. Siti, how would you keep students motivated and on track in that kind of situation?
First of all, I think anything that comes in the form of shared document helps, because as much as we want to assign students with any long-term tasks, they must be briefed really clearly about the expectations, the rubrics, and what is expected of them on weekly basis. It's a good thing to also set up a group chat if we assign the tasks by groups or individual. But of course, very much this depends on whether the students want to respond to us or not in the first place. But this is the mode of communication that you can always attend to, not only during school hours. Because I think one best thing about this is, of course, some teachers don't like the idea that, oh, I'm not available after school hours. But sometimes we don't really know what happened at home, especially when students are sharing devices among their siblings. And the only time they have is maybe, slightly a couple of hours after school to reach out to us and ask questions. So I'm like an advocate of group chats and all those texting thing going on when communicating with students, doing online learning. Yeah.
That's a really valuable point about devices and the amount of devices that might be available to students in a household, and having that flexibility. Group chat sounds like exactly the way forward in that situation, and shared documents. Nik, are those things you use, and what else would you suggest in that situation?
Yeah, I think that's really good advice, really good advice. And one of the things that I would add is that, which probably comes from my background as a project manager as well, is give them some project management tools if you're developing projects, and those are kind of great tools for students to learn how to use. I mean, one of my favorite ones is the idea of the Kanban board. I don't know if you've heard of this concept of Kanban. I might not be pronouncing it correctly too, but a Kanban board is like...
Sorry, Kanban board. That sounds good.
Kanban board. And basically what it is, you can have one, you can have a digital one, or you can have one with sticky notes, a physical one. And what you do is you break down the work that you have to do on all these different notes, and you have them in three columns. You have the list of things you need to do. Then as you do them, you move them into the list of things that you're doing. And as you finish them, move them into the things that you've done. So there you have all your work laid out in your first column. You see your progress and you see what you've achieved. And you're gradually seeing all these notes gradually move across your Kanban board until they're all completed. And this gives you a sense of, okay, this is the progress that I'm making. This is what I've achieved. This is how much I have left to do. And seeing that visually and sort of knowing what they have to do, I think can really help students a lot. You can
That's really motivating.
You can very easily set a digital one up on a platform called Trello, which is free, and that helps you to sort of break down the different. Then you have digital sticky notes, or you can just put it up on a wall with some post-it notes or something like that. Just sort of having that tool can help you sort of visualize where you're doing and what you're doing.
That's great. That's a great tip. So shared documents, group chat, and a Trello board. I'm thinking with teaching remotely, probably the Trello board is a little bit better. And I'm thinking about sticky notes. You'd have to make sure they were very sticky notes, wouldn't you? Because the last thing you'd want is it's something that you hadn't, something disappearing from the board.
But with something like Trello as well, which is a digital tool, they're kind of digital sticky notes. You can make it collaborative too. So each student can have their own Trello board, and you can actually go in as a teacher and check them to make sure that they're moving things and see how they're progressing. Or the whole class can have one together, and you can assign different notes to different students, things like that. Which is an interesting tool, and one, like I say, it's one that's used in the workplace by a lot of remote teams, and so that's a useful skill to have. Yeah,
and really empowering for the students as well. That they're creating that, they can see it, they move it along, and of course the teacher can check on and make sure they actually are doing it. But I think that's a real tool of empowerment there. And in this situation where students often feel that they're, at the whim of other people's decisions and are maybe feeling less than empowered, the things that we can build in that give them that sense of ownership must really help them confidence wise. One question that comes up again and again when we're talking to teachers about remote learning is this idea of how do I differentiate effectively in the remote classroom? Nik, what kind of advice would you give to teachers?
That is an interesting one because I don't think it's that different from how you do it in a physical classroom. I think as a teacher, if you're really in touch with how your students are progressing and what things that they're having problems with, and you understand what their needs are, then you respond appropriately in the same way that you would in the physical classroom. I've heard a lot of people talking about artificial intelligence and how it will enable us to, develop this kind of differentiated learning. And I think, well, we've got some real intelligence. We can do that ourselves. Any teacher who's really in touch with their students and how they're doing, is probably doing that anyway.
Absolutely, yes. And Siti, what would you like to add to that?
Looking at mathematics as a subject, sorry, that's my bias here. I usually offer learners with online and offline work that allow them to choose how best to approach the task. When it comes to differentiation, the way we see it is, there are level questions. We start with the easy one, going levels up. But to me, I rather expose everything because I think everyone has the right to see where it goes next. Whether they are able to do it or not now, it doesn't guarantee that they can't do it later in the future. So it's just about laying out all the expectations in the beginning and let them see the stages that they need to go in order to achieve the highest level of a particular skill set. So for example, if I'm using Dr. Frost Maths, it's easy to set up a worksheet that has an upward progression. So what students need to do is they have to access at the same easy level and they move up the difficulty level. So what I'm telling my students is that you do all questions, but it's okay if you are not able to engage with the later questions, as they can always leave that and do a cleanup task whereby they will be trained bit by bit to access those harder questions later on. Yeah.
I love the idea of letting all of the students see all of the questions. It's like these ones aren't hidden for this particular group of students. Everyone can see these. Everyone can see, and that's wonderful as well, isn't it? It's like everybody. You break down that idea that you both touched on in the introductions. That feeling that your teacher's pigeonholed you, that your teacher has decided already what you are capable of, and I think something like that, Siti, really starts to break that down, doesn't it?
Yes, absolutely.
Yeah. And also that idea that while you might have found this topic challenging, the next one you might be able to go further.
True, especially in maths. Because it's different.
Yeah, absolutely. Sorry, say that again, Siti.
Yes, because it offers different contents and the ranges are very wide.
Yeah, certainly. So some great tips there. Earlier, Siti, you talked about you, the teacher, as an authentic individual and what you bring to your class because you are you. And we all talked about the importance of these great teachers, and it was their authenticity that spoke to your authenticity and helped you to be the person you can be. So teaching is very much about you as an individual, isn't it? And very much a performance art. Yeah, I was a classroom teacher for many years myself, and it is very much you leading the way. So how, and I think that's something that is very enjoyable for a lot of teachers, and I think that's something that's enjoyable for a lot of students as well. How do we keep that element when we move to online lessons? Like, what do you do to bring that art of teaching as performance, or to bring you and your personality to that online classroom? What do you think, Siti?
To me, I strive to make my maths lessons fun and make myself approachable to all my students. this is something that I have discovered about what I'm advocating for as a mathematics teacher. So once you know your core values, the means to express them will be clearer. So what I did was I learned how to type faster. I keep myself up with the gamers as well as internet lingos. So at one point, I was replying to a group chat of my year 7 class after school because some of the students were asking some questions about their maths work. And I typed AFK and left for a while. So when I came back, my group chat was flooded with words of encouragement, heartfelt crying memes here and there, because they said I embraced the way they're saying things when texting. Or AFK means away from keyboard. So because I want to establish what I want to AFK. So because I want to establish a platform of communication where students can accept me as one of their own. I even have a Discord account now. See, I'm enlightened to all this. So once I'm in, I'll be considered as one of them. It is much easier to send across my message and instructions as I'm speaking using their language. Yeah.
So Nick, over to you. How do you keep that element in an online lesson?
Well, first I'd like to say that, that element of performance is very important. And this is something that I found out, as I said, a few years back when I was working as head of learning for this online school. What we did was let teachers, because most of the classes were one-to-one, we let students choose the teacher they wanted. And then we sort of analysed who were the most successful and popular teachers and looked at what they were doing differently from what other teachers were doing. And what we found was the teachers who were most popular and most successful were those ones who were able to make that kind of that connection, through the camera. They were very good in front of the camera. They were dynamic. They were able to project their personality through the camera and really make that kind of interpersonal connection with the students. And that's sort of one of the things that I took from that. And that's something that I've tried to use myself. When I'm teaching remotely, you guys can see, but you can't see if you're listening. I actually stand up when I'm teaching, so I can move about.
I noticed you were standing up, and I was a bit jealous.
That more dynamic. I can move backwards and forwards, and I can use this space. And I think that's one of the things that I try to teach teachers who are moving to the remote classroom is, you have to learn to use this little space and use it in a dynamic way. You can see my hands moving about because I'm standing that much further back. I can move in and sort of wag my finger at you if I need to get your attention, and this element of just, making sure you're making eye contact with the camera, facing the camera and smiling and, being aware that people are watching you the whole time. We had a whole bunch of teachers who were kind of sitting, looking bored, or drinking something, had the camera pointing into their ear or up their nose or something like that, or they were this speaking silhouette that was completely backlit, and it's very hard to make that connection with students if they can't see you properly. So I think how you frame yourself within the picture, thinking about how you're projecting your personality and using your body language is very important, particularly as language teachers, because that's a large part of learning and using a language is how you use your body and your facial expressions when you're talking. And again, if we come back to this thing about being able to film ourselves, that's something that I found really useful. The fact that I can see myself the whole time I'm talking makes me that much more aware of my body language. And it's really helped me to improve my body language for when I'm speaking. I'm improving how I use my hands and things like that. And, and so watching those things and keeping an eye on those things. So, I think, understanding the body language and how to use the camera, how to use that little space dynamically is sort of a really important part of your teacher persona and projecting it.
Yeah. So obviously, teachers listening to us right now can't see what I can see, but I can see how Nick is really walking his talk. He's standing back from the camera and he's using all of his body language to connect. And I think that's a really fantastic takeaway for teachers today. When you started to talk about how the teachers that were the most popular were the ones that could connect through the camera, and I was thinking, well, that sounds like one of those soft skills that's really hard to explain, but you've given a series of really practical tips there. And I think if there's one thing that you could take away from this small section of the podcast, and one that I'm certainly going to take away for teacher training, is just to try standing up. It's to try standing up and see how that changes how you feel, because that's how you tend to teach.
Yeah, that's right. You don't sit down while you're teaching, and and we all know that sitting at a desk all day is the new smoking. It's terrible for your health. So the more time you spend standing up and moving around, and if you want to give your students space, you can move outside of the frame and leave them to it, so that it looks like you're gone. So having that ability, it does help to have. I've got headphones, as you can see, that aren't connected by cable, so they're Bluetooth headphones. So don't go yanking the cable out and falling over or something like that. But, that really helps. And there are activities that you can give students to do to help them improve their body language, because when we feel emphatic towards someone, we tend to mirror their body language. And so you can actually give them mirroring activities. So, you do a pose and they have to copy it and things like that.
Yeah.
Or give examples of how different it is when you're not making eye contact and when you are. Those kinds of things, Seeing how
I really like what you mentioned there about how you can walk off the screen, because that really does replicate the face-to-face classroom in an online setting. Because in a face-to-face classroom, you don't have your teacher looking at you, staring at you for 60 minutes. That's not what happens. The teacher does speak to you and then pops off to speak to another group, or turns around to write something on the to project something on the board or write something on the board. So they're not always staring right at you. So trying to break that up would seem like a really simple but effective way to give that student the feeling, the authentic feeling of being in the face-to-face classroom, or just make them feel more comfortable.
Yeah, I think that stepping out of the screen is important too for kind of if you're doing group work, because often, we put students in breakout rooms to do group work. But then if you want to monitor, you have to go to the breakout room. And of course, as soon as you appear there, everybody stops speaking. But if you can kind of step out and just sort of, monitor that way, at least you don't have that kind of feeling of intruding on their class or intruding on their conversation, rather than sort of, okay, is everybody speaking?
Yeah, you're right. And as teachers as well, we would do that kind of surreptitious listening to groups, wouldn't we? Again, we wouldn't necessarily always go and stand right in front of them. We might be just at a desk nearby or just be walking through the classroom and would kind of tune into them to see what's going on in that group before deciding whether or not that was a good time to approach. So that would give you that flexibility as well, wouldn't it? Rather than just jumping abruptly into a breakout room.
Yeah.
That's all we've got time for right now. And I just want to say a massive thank you to Siti and Nik. You have been fantastic guests. And if people want to find out more about you, where could they do that? Nik, how could people find out more about you and what you do?
I guess they can just Google Peachey Publications and they'll find my website, or they can find Nik Peachey on Twitter or on Facebook or on LinkedIn or on Scoop It or on Instagram. Yeah, I've got quite a strong social media presence. So
I was going to say,
I'm not hard to find.
But... We'll have to, and of course we will put relevant links in the show notes as well. And Siti, how can people find out more about you and follow you?
I'm on Twitter. My Twitter handle is at my Siti Zaza, as well as LinkedIn. Just search for Siti Zaleha. Hopefully you'll find me.
Yeah, of course. And once again, we will put your links in the show notes. Right, so thank you so much to our listeners today. And please remember to tell your friends about us, rate our show, like and subscribe on whatever platform you're listening on. Our show notes have lots of useful links that we've discussed throughout the show, so please check those out. Remember to follow us on Twitter at CUP Education and use the hashtag BrighterPod to get in touch with us. Thank you so much again to our wonderful guests and to you listening at home or wherever you might be. And we look forward to having you back again on our Brighter Thinking pod.